Chapter 1. Small Cracks. Hi, you're watching Reddit Confessions. This isn't a story about a sudden disaster. There was no explosion, no dramatic betrayal revealed in a single night. Instead, it was slow. A quiet erosion. Like water carving stone, day by day. Until one morning I looked up and realized everything I thought was solid had already been hollowed out. It started with little things. She used to wait for me to come home, even if it was late. I'd walk in and she'd be curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, half asleep but smiling as soon as I opened the door. Those nights felt warm, safe, ours. But then, gradually, I started coming home to darkness. No TV, no music, no smell of dinner. Just silence. At first, I told myself she was tired. Work had been stressful. Everyone needs space sometimes. I didn't want to be the kind of husband who doubted every move. Still, I noticed the changes. The way her phone seemed to never leave her hand. The way she tilted the screen slightly when I walked by. The laughter, sharp, quick bursts, while texting someone, then the silence when I asked what was funny. "Oh, nothing," she'd say, brushing it off. Her wardrobe shifted too. Dresses she hadn't worn in years suddenly appeared again, paired with perfume she once swore gave her headaches. I told her she looked beautiful, and she smiled politely, like I was just another voice in the crowd. I told myself not to overthink it. People change. Marriages go through phases. That's what everyone says, right? But deep down, something was stirring. A quiet unease. A gut feeling I kept pushing down because admitting it felt like betrayal. Of myself, of the life we built, of the trust one clung to. The moment that sealed it for me came one Tuesday night. I had stayed late at the office and stopped by the store on my way home. When I walked through the door, I noticed the lights were on in the kitchen. Her laptop sat open on the table, screen glowing. That alone was strange. She hated leaving it unlocked. I set down the groceries, and before I could look away, a message popped up. Just a small notification in the corner of the screen. I didn't touch a thing. I just read. "Last night was perfect. Can't wait to see you again." No name. Just a number. I stood there, frozen. Not in anger. Not even in shock. But in a kind of silence so deep it rang in my ears. Like I'd been underwater, holding my breath, and suddenly realized I didn't know how long I'd been down there. When she came home 20 minutes later, humming softly, holding a bag from a boutique I didn't recognize, I couldn't even speak. She smiled when she saw me. "Oh, you're home early." I wanted to ask her 1,000 questions. Who was it? Where were you? Why? But instead, I just nodded and asked if she'd eaten. She said yes. I asked with who. She hesitated. "Just friends." Friends don't send messages like that. She walked past me, poured herself a glass of wine, and went to bed. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at that glowing screen, the unopened groceries still sitting on the counter, and felt something inside me begin to break. That was the first crack. Chapter 2. The Collector. After that night, nothing looked the same anymore. The kitchen where we used to laugh over burnt toast felt like a stage. Every word she spoke sounded rehearsed. And me? I became an actor too, pretending not to notice, pretending I still believed. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation felt like slamming a door, and I wasn't ready to hear it slam shut. Instead, I began collecting. Quietly. Carefully. The first piece was a receipt. I found it in her car while looking for a pen. Folded neatly in the glove box. Printed with the name of a waterfront hotel. Dinner for 2. A suite upstairs. Date stamped last Friday. She had told me she was at her mother's that night. I stared at that receipt for a long time. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from confirmation. That whisper in my gut wasn't paranoia. It was truth, waiting for me to catch up. The second piece came from her purse. A movie ticket. 2 admissions. She had sworn she went with co-workers, just the girls. But the stub said otherwise. The third piece arrived on social media, of all places. A picture of her at brunch, smiling wide, sunglasses perched on her nose. In the reflection of the lens, barely visible, was a man's arm, resting on the table beside hers. It wasn't mine. Each discovery hurt less than the last. Not because I felt numb, but because the shock was gone. The first wound is always the deepest. After that, you just bleed slower. I began writing everything down. Dates, times, excuses, receipts taped into a notebook like grotesque little trophies. It wasn't about revenge. I wasn't planning some dramatic reveal. I just needed the proof for myself, so when the final moment came, I wouldn't doubt. I wouldn't think I imagined it. At night, I lay in bed beside her, listening to the soft tap of her fingers on the phone. Sometimes she'd roll over and smile at me, press a quick kiss to my shoulder, and say, "Good night." I'd whisper it back, knowing she'd stay awake long after me, laughing into a glowing screen I'd never see. And I realized something terrifying. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was her alibi. Her cover story. The safe, steady man she could point to and say, "See? My life is fine." But behind the curtain, she had already left. So I kept collecting. Quietly. Patiently. Not to catch her. Not to save us. But to prepare myself for the moment I'd finally walk away. Because I knew it was coming. And the scariest part? She didn't notice a thing. Chapter 3. The Exit Plan. By the time a month had passed, I had more than enough proof. The notebook was filling up. Receipts folded like guilty origami. Time scribbled down in ink that pressed too hard into the paper. Patterns circled and underlined. But proof didn't matter anymore. Not to her. She was already gone in ways she would never admit. The proof was for me. So I wouldn't wake up one day, years from now, wondering if I had imagined it all. That's when I stopped thinking like a husband. And started thinking like a man preparing an escape. I didn't rage. I didn't accuse. I smiled when she spoke, kissed her on the cheek when she left the room, nodded along when she talked about working late. On the surface, nothing changed. But behind the curtain, everything shifted. The first step was money. Quietly, carefully, I opened a new account in my name only. I started moving small amounts over. Nothing she would notice. Nothing that would raise suspicion. 100 here. 200 there. Like dripping water into a separate glass until, slowly, it filled. The second step was space. I rented a small storage unit on the edge of town. When she was out with friends, I packed boxes, just a few at a time. Old clothes, books, keepsakes I couldn't leave behind. I loaded them into the car and drove them to the unit. Every trip felt like I was peeling another layer of myself out of the house. The third step was detachment. The hardest one. I trained myself to stop reacting. To her laughter at the phone. To the perfume she wore that wasn't for me. To the excuses. I became quiet. Watchful. Like an actor who already knew the ending of the play but had to keep performing until the curtain fell. Some nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she even noticed the distance growing between us. If she realized that the man beside her was no longer holding on, but letting go. But if she did, she never said a word. One evening, as she zipped a small suitcase, a work retreat, she called it, I helped her close it. My hand steady, my smile calm. She kissed my cheek, humming, and walked out the door. 10 minutes later, I carried my own suitcase to the car. Not as heavy as hers, but heavier in ways she would never understand. I didn't leave a note. Not yet. I wasn't finished. But in that moment, as I drove toward the storage unit, the city lights stretching out ahead of me, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. The exit wasn't complete, but the plan was in motion. And I knew, sooner rather than later, she would come home to a silence even she couldn't explain away. Chapter 4. The Vanishing. The night it finally happened didn't feel special. No storm outside, no dramatic fight, no cinematic moment. Just another ordinary weekend. That's how betrayal works. It hides in the ordinary. She was packing a small bag again. "Girls' weekend," she said with that same rehearsed smile. I asked where, already knowing the answer would be vague. She told me the mountains. I nodded. I didn't ask who she was going with. I didn't need to. I carried her suitcase to the door, zipped it closed for her. She kissed my cheek like a stranger does when they don't want to be rude. Then she was gone. This time, I didn't wait. Within minutes, I was moving. The last of my things, clothes from the closet, files from the desk, a few photos that still mattered, straight into the trunk of my car. My movements were calm, almost mechanical. I had rehearsed this 100 times in my head, and now my body simply followed the script. The joint account? Already drained into the one with only my name. The furniture? Left behind, like bones of a life I no longer wanted to live in. The photos of us together? Torn in half, the pieces dumped into the trash can outside. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I was gone. The apartment that once felt like a home was stripped of me. My presence erased as carefully as she had erased me from her heart. But I wasn't cruel. I didn't leave her guessing. On the kitchen counter, where her laptop usually sat glowing late at night, I placed an envelope. Inside were copies of the hotel receipts, the screenshots of late-night messages, a timeline of the lies she thought I never noticed. At the very end, one single line written in my own hand. You don't get to replace me quietly. I was already gone. When she came back that Sunday night, humming the way she always did after being with him, she would find the silence waiting. A silence so deep it would echo. Half-empty drawers. A hollow closet. The envelope staring back at her like a mirror she couldn't avoid. I wasn't there to see her reaction. That was intentional. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want tears. I didn't want rage. I wanted distance. Clean. Sharp. Final. That night, I slept in a small apartment across town. The bed was hard, the blinds were crooked, the air smelled faintly of old paint. But it was mine. No lies between the walls. No phone buzzing with secrets. Just the kind of quiet that tells the truth. And for the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of her. Chapter 5. The Other Man. I didn't plan to see him. I didn't even know if I wanted to. But life has a way of arranging coincidences that feel deliberate, as if the universe enjoys a little cruelty. It happened at a gas station on a Tuesday afternoon. I had pulled in to fill the tank, my mind mostly empty, replaying nothing in particular. And then he was there. Oh, confident in a way that seemed effortless. Tanned like he spent more time in the sun than he should. Clothes expensive but not flashy. And that smile, the one that immediately made me feel like I was standing on the wrong side of the story. He recognized me before I spoke. Hey, you're Greg, right? His voice was casual, friendly, unaware. And that made it worse. Yes, I said slowly, extending my hand. His grip was firm. Too firm. I'm Adam, he said, smiling like we were supposed to be friends. Mara talks about you a lot. She says you're thoughtful. Thoughtful. The word echoed in my mind. Thoughtful. The word that had once been the cornerstone of my marriage, now twisted into a joke I couldn't laugh at. I nodded. I didn't speak. I let him fill the silence with stories of nights out, casual dinners, walks in the park. He spoke as if we shared nothing, as if he and I were just two men orbiting the same woman in different worlds. And in that moment it hit me. He didn't know. He thought I approved. He thought I existed as a ghost in her narrative, a minor character who posed no threat. I smiled. Just enough to appear polite. Just enough to hide the storm that had been building inside me. So, you two serious? I asked casually, the engine humming softly in the background. He laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves like sandpaper. No, nothing like that. Just spending time together, you know? She's amazing. She deserves someone who notices her. I let that hang between us. The silence. Heavy. The truth I carried, invisible. I didn't tell him. I didn't shout. I didn't demand he leave her. I didn't even curse him under my breath. I shook his hand again, thanked him for the chat, and walked back to my car. As I drove away, a strange calm settled over me. Not relief. Not anger. Clarity. I had the proof. I had the distance. I had the quiet control I needed to finally step out of her story and into my own. And he would continue believing whatever she fed him, blind to everything. That was his problem, not mine. I realized then that freedom doesn't arrive in fireworks or confrontations. It arrives quietly, like the turning of a page. And for the first time in a long time, I could write my next chapter. Chapter 6. Rebuilding. The first morning in my new apartment was strange. No familiar sounds of her humming. No half-empty coffee cups left on the counter. No lingering perfume in the air. Just silence. Honest, unbroken silence. I walked around the small studio and noticed everything for the first time. The uneven floorboards, the thin blinds letting in streaks of sunlight, the faint scent of paint mixed with dust. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I made coffee and sipped it slowly, savoring the taste without guilt or distraction. The kind of simple pleasure I hadn't allowed myself in years. I started keeping a small journal. Not about her, not about the betrayal, but about me. Notes on routines, goals, the little things that mattered. At first I felt guilty. Guilty for leaving. Guilty for finally admitting I wasn't going to wait for her to decide whether our marriage was worth saving. But slowly, that guilt began to fade. In its place was clarity. I had stayed too long in a story that wasn't mine. Now I could write my own. I returned to running. Early mornings, empty streets, the wind against my face. At first, my legs burned, my lungs screamed. My body reminded me I hadn't done this in years. But with each mile, a little weight lifted. Not physical, but emotional. A burden I hadn't realized I carried for more than a decade. Work became easier too. I focused on projects with intention, with a presence I hadn't had before. Meetings that once felt like a blur were now opportunities to engage fully. Emails I used to skim for her convenience, I now read and responded to carefully, thoughtfully. The envelope I had left behind in her apartment occasionally flashed in my mind. Her reactions, her disbelief, the way she must have realized she couldn't manipulate me anymore. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt closure. A quiet, unshakable certainty that I had taken the steps I needed to reclaim myself. Friends began noticing the change. My phone, once a tool of obligation and hidden stress, became a lifeline to people who mattered. Conversations no longer carried an undertone of pretending, of hiding. I started reconnecting slowly, cautiously, with those I had ignored or pushed away over the years. And then, one evening, I caught my reflection in the window of a coffee shop. The man staring back at me looked tired, yes. But there was something new. Something resolute. The lines of uncertainty softened. The posture, once slumped from long years of worry, stood taller. For the first time in a long time, I could meet my own eyes without feeling small. I realized something important. Moving forward doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't undo the betrayal, the lies, the years of pretending. But it allows you to live again. To breathe without the weight of someone else's choices pressing on your chest. I didn't wait for apologies. I didn't hope she would come back. I didn't even look for them. Because freedom isn't given. It's quietly claimed, step by step, day by day. And that's what I did. I woke up the next morning, made my coffee, stretched my legs, and for the first time in years, smiled, not at her, not at the past, but at myself. The past was a story I survived. The future was mine to write. Chapter 7. Closure. By the following week, I had cut the last threads tying me to her. I changed every password she could possibly know. Email, streaming accounts, even the shared subscriptions we'd forgotten to separate. I notified the banks, ensuring the accounts she once accessed were mine alone. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because I needed certainty. The social media accounts were harder. Mutual friends, tagged photos, reminders of what used to be. I unfollowed, muted, and archived. Every post, every memory that whispered her name was tucked away, not destroyed, just out of reach. The silence felt good, peaceful, controlled. One afternoon, I found myself walking past our old favorite cafe. Memories of long mornings sipping coffee, the subtle rhythm of shared glances, the easy chatter, it all threatened to pull me backward. But I walked in anyway, alone, and ordered a coffee. No one knew me. No one asked. I took a seat by the window and watched people live lives that had nothing to do with mine. And I realized, I could do that too. I allowed myself to grieve quietly. Not in fits of anger or despair, but in moments that crept up when I least expected them. A song on the radio, the smell of rain on the pavement, a book we used to read together. I cried once, alone in my apartment, not because I missed her, but because I had allowed myself to carry her weight for so long. And then I let it go. I didn't tell her where I had gone. I didn't answer her calls or texts. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I had to save myself from the patterns of the past. She gambled on my silence. I gambled on my own life. And for once, the odds were in my favor. Weeks passed, then months. I started running further, reading more, sleeping deeper. Small victories built on quiet routines. Grocery shopping, making coffee, checking in with friends, remembering birthdays. I discovered the joy of being unobserved, unseen, and fully present in my own skin. One evening, I looked around my apartment. The blinds still crooked, the floorboards uneven, the small desk in the corner, clutter-free for the first time. And I smiled, not at what I had lost, but at what I had reclaimed. Freedom isn't loud. It isn't announced with declarations or dramatic exits. It is quiet, subtle. It is the soft turning of a page, the unclenching of fists, the ability to breathe without remembering who used to occupy the space next to you. I had survived her betrayal. I had left behind the chaos and lies. I had taken my proof, my strength, my clarity, and I had built something new. And now, the silence belonged entirely to me. No one else could claim it. It was mine.